Hey guys, Sean here. Welcome to the F1 Word and to a look at some of the things you might need or want to know ahead of the 2020 Formula 1 season. Now, quick disclaimer, something I wish I'd done in Tuesday's video, but this is not an exhaustive list. There might be a few things you'd like to know about this season that aren't included, but we are going to be live this Sunday at 5 PM UK time, and so if there is anything you'd like to know that I've not included or you've got a question for us, then please do feel free to pop it in the comment section down below and we'll answer some of those during the stream on Sunday. But without further ado, let's crack on with this video, starting with a reminder of this year's driver lineups. Mercedes have once again stuck with Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas. Interesting lineup to keep an eye on because we've got the team going for a 7th consecutive Constructors title. We've got Lewis Hamilton trying to equal that record of Michael Schumacher's 7 World Drivers titles. And it'll be interesting to see, is this the year that Valtteri Bottas is finally able to maintain a title challenge against Lewis Hamilton? Could be a tasty lineup. Ferrari last season together for Vettel and Leclerc, of course, with Seb leaving for sabbatical probably at the end of this season. But I've got a feeling that is going to be gloves off in that lineup. There's nothing there for Vettel to lose now, and he's hardly going to be hopping out of the way for his teammates, so keep an eye on that one. At Red Bull, it's Verstappen and Albon again, and this is a big year for both of those drivers. This could be, to date, Max Verstappen's best opportunity to win a world title, and Alex Albon is going to be desperate to keep hold of that seat. There's going to be some big names floating around in that driver market, and he's going to want to prove that he deserves to be there. So can he build on what he did in the final? Was it 8 or 9 races last year? Really looking forward to watching that one. Also, looking forward to watching Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris go head-to-head for the final time this season in the same team. Of course, I might have mentioned it, but Carlos Sainz is going to Ferrari to replace Sebastian Vettel. So the last time that bromance, I can't believe I just said that in a video, is going to be seen together in McLaren Papaya. Let's quickly move on from this. And at Renault, this is Daniel Ricciardo and Esteban Ocon's first and last season as teammates at that team, with Ricciardo heading off to McLaren to replace Sainz. And I really want to keep an eye on Renault, and I urge you to as well. How much backing is Daniel Ricciardo going to get from that team given that he's leaving? And could that have a negative impact on his season? Surely they're going to put everything behind Ocon. At AlphaTauri, they've stuck with Daniel Kvyat and Pierre Gasly. Of course, both of those are going to want to perform just in case Alex Albon doesn't do so at Red Bull. There could be a seat open there for either of those. At Racing Point, it's Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll. Stroll needs to sort out his Saturdays. I keep saying it. If he does that, I really believe he'd be a lot closer to Perez. I don't think he'd beat him. But also, given that team are probably dark horses for 4th place in the championship, they're going to need him to back up what Perez is doing. As for Checo, he'll just do what Checo does, deliver consistent results and help that team to climb the Constructors' Championship. Down at Alfa Romeo, they've got Kimi Raikkonen. Is it his last season? I feel like we've said that for the last 2 or 3 years, but it could well be. And Antonio Giovinazzi, having missed out on that Ferrari drive, will be itching to show what he's got. Haas, they've stuck with K-Mag and Rogro. Quite simply, they've got to stop running into each other. That team needs consistency and needs both of their drivers to be finishing races and scoring as many points as possible. And last, but by no means least, is Williams. They've still got George Russell, and Nicholas Latifi will be coming in to replace Robert Kubica. But with all due respect to Latifi, the one you're watching here is George Russell. Can he do enough to potentially secure a Mercedes drive for 2021? I'm not just saying it because I'm overhyped for the season, but I think we've got some very fascinating and potentially very explosive lineups on the grid this year. Now, usually in this kind of video, that will be it for the driver lineup rundown, but this year, there is probably a higher than normal chance that teams may have to use their reserve drivers. Basically, if one of their main drivers tests positive for COVID-19, somebody needs to step in, so we kind of need to know who that's going to be. So here are your reserve drivers. At Mercedes, it is Stoffel Van Dorn and Esteban Gutierrez. Now, obviously, Van Dorn does have Formula E commitments when it returns in August, but with all due respect to Formula E, if he's not in the title fight there and Mercedes came knocking, I'm pretty sure he'd take up that shot at potentially winning races in Formula 1. If not, they may have to turn to Gutierrez, but don't forget they may also choose to promote Russell for a race or two. So they've got options, Mercedes. Red Bull and AlphaTauri, Sergio Sette Camara and Sebastian Buemi are both listed as their reserve drivers. Now, Camara has got his own commitments in Super Formula in Japan, but travel restrictions could prevent him from being able to travel and therefore race for Red Bull or AlphaTauri. But pushing that aside for a second, the most likely scenario is that Daniel Kvyat or Pierre Gasly would move up to Red Bull, with Camara or Buemi taking their seat at AlphaTauri. And of course, if either Gasly or Kvyat come down with COVID, then one of those drivers would fill those seats too. Ferrari, their official reserve driver is actually Antonio Giovinazzi. although Pascal Wehrlein is also still on their books and of course may not have any Formula E commitments this year, having left Mahindra at time of recording anyway. There's been no word on where he's going next. but should Ferrari opt to take on Giovinazzi, Alfa Romeo would need a driver, and that could see Robert Kubica back on the grid again. He is their official reserve driver. As for McLaren, it has been agreed that they will be allowed to use the official Mercedes reserve drivers if they need to in 2020, so that's Van Dorn and Gutierrez again. However, that gets complicated because Racing Point also have a similar deal with the Silver Arrows and actually have first refusal on the drivers should both teams need one at the same time. As for Renault, none of their nominated test drivers have a super license, and Cyril Abiteboul has previously stated that the team have options and will announce them in due course. So perhaps a return for Hülkenberg, or maybe Sergei Sirotkin could get a shot. Who knows with Renault? And when it comes to the final two teams on the grid, Haas have got Louis Delatraz and Pietro Fittipaldi as their reserves. And as for Williams, their official reserve driver is Jack Aitken. Right then, that's the driver lineups out of the way. Should we have a look at this calendar for 2020, or at least the one we have so far? The season will start next weekend, the 3rd to 5th of July at the Red Bull Ring in Austria for the Austrian Grand Prix. And then just 1 week later, there is a second race at the Red Bull Ring, which many of the publications seem to be now calling the Styrian Grand Prix. So that's probably which way I'll go with that. And then a week after that, so 3 races back to back, Formula 1 moves on to the Hungaroring for the Hungarian Grand Prix. Teams then get a weekend off before another triple header starting at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix on July 31st to 2nd of August. That is then followed by a second race at Silverstone, but this one is called the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. I really love that name. Obviously, a week after that is another race, this time in Spain, and that is across the weekend of the 14th to 16th of August. That's followed by another weekend off for teams, and then it's on to Spa for the Belgian Grand Prix across the weekend of the 28th to 30th of August. Then 7 days later, they're at Monza for the Italian Grand Prix on the 4th to the 6th of September. Now that is where the calendar officially ends at time of recording. However, it's looking incredibly likely that Mugello will follow Monza, although a second race at Monza is possible, and Imola is still pushing hard for a race, although reports claim the layout of the pit exit is a concern for F1 bosses. Long story short, it looks as though we are set for wall-to-wall racing between now and the end of the year, and as ever, I will be covering it all right here on the channel. Now, super quickly, before I go any further, I was looking through my analytics the other day, and it turns out that more than half of the views on this channel come from people who are not subscribed. So, if you are enjoying the content and want to hear more of my sometimes random ramblings about the 2020 season, and indeed help me to get to 100k subs, then please do consider subscribing. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of the content coming over the next few months. And believe me, there is going to be a lot of it, and I cannot wait. Let's get back to it then, and obviously given the current global situation, Formula 1 needs to make sure that they are racing as safely as possible. And during the shutdown, the sport announced the 5 steps it will be taking to help keep everyone safe. So the first step is that all Formula 1 personnel will be tested before travelling to events, and that apparently goes as far as tests every 2 days for some people. The second step is that initially the 2020 season will see races held behind closed doors, so no fans of course, and only the essential personnel will be allowed to access a circuit across a race weekend. Now, bosses have said they are hoping to allow fans to attend later in the year, but they will not rush that decision and will only do so when it is safe to do so. Step 3 is that there will be a reduced number of personnel at the racetracks, including team members, the staff of suppliers, F1, the FIA and the media. And step 4, when travelling to and from venues, personnel will be using chartered flights as much as possible, and there will be private, isolated transfers of staff between venues, hotels and airports. And this is all part of the bubble or biosphere that Ross Brawn was speaking about a few weeks back. And step 5 is, of course, social distancing measures which will be in place throughout the paddock. However, there is an acknowledgement that that won't always be possible. So where people can't realistically follow social distancing rules, all personnel will be using PPE as we've seen at shakedowns, including face masks and face shields, and hand hygiene will obviously be a huge part of the measures taken to help reduce the risk of spreading the virus. So they are the 5 steps that F1 have put forward, but there is more to it. Ross Brawn confirmed earlier this month that pre- and post-race activities will have to change, with as few personnel as possible on the grid before the start of the race, with a maximum currently set at 40 people per team, not per driver, per team. They will also have to begin leaving the grid at the 5-minute warning, which is actually 2 minutes earlier than usual. And when the 3-minute warning is shown, no more than 16 members of each team will be allowed on the grid. And should any team break this rule, drivers could end up with an in-race penalty. Also, should social distancing not be possible on the grid, and it is deemed too much of a risk to have so many people in close proximity, the FIA have also put forward the option of cars going straight from their pit garages to the grid for the start of the race. Shock horror, the drivers' parade will also not go ahead, but that was pretty obvious given that there will be no fans at the circuits. And post-race, there will be no podium ceremony, but F1 bosses are looking at options which could include the top 3 cars lining up on the track with the drivers standing in front of them for the celebrations. And there won't, by the way, be the normal trophy presentation included in that, but Ross Brawn has previously said, quote, "We have worked it out, we have plans and procedures, we are looking at how we can present it on TV." Now, despite the fact we've had no racing and everything has been shut down, Formula One and the teams have still been busy and have thrashed out some new rules that will come into force for the 2020 season. The first is the return of the engine freeze, with the 4 power unit manufacturers in Formula One only able to supply a certain number of different specification power unit elements over the course of a season. So for 2020, manufacturers will not be permitted to make changes to some major combustion engine components, the turbocharger, MGUH or fuel and engine oil. And only one change will be permitted to each of those at the end of this season for next season. Teams will also have to use this year's car for next season as the sport looks to reduce costs further. And as a result, a token system for development has been introduced, with teams still being allowed to develop their cars between seasons, but that development will be restricted. It should also be noted that as of March 28th this year, there's been a ban on aerodynamic development for the 2022 car, so teams can't take advantage of this extra time between regulation changes. There have also been provisions put in place for the number of power unit elements that a driver will be able to change before receiving a penalty to be adjusted. Although a specific number hasn't been given just yet, the idea is that should the calendar be significantly shorter than the original 22 races, drivers will have fewer power unit elements at their disposal. And on top of those, there is to be a reduction of aerodynamic testing and the introduction of power unit test bench restrictions. And there are also provisions in place to allow for tyre testing to take place during FP2 should Pirelli need to test or approve a new tyre specification. Now, as said earlier, this is not an exhaustive run-through of the changes for 2020 and beyond, just a few of the headlines, but more detailed information about the tweaks to the regulations can be found on the FIA and Formula One websites. On the subject of tyres, though, there are changes when it comes to race weekends. Earlier this month, Pirelli announced the tyre compounds that would be available for the opening 8 races of the season. And just in case you missed that announcement, I will pop them on screen now. But there has been a change to how the tyres will be allocated for each driver this season. Pirelli have now confirmed that each driver will be allocated 2 sets of the nominated hard tyres, 3 sets of the mediums, and then 8 sets of the red marked soft tyre. That is the same for every single driver, and that's for every race too. In some ways, it's disappointing because it does remove some of these strategy options for the teams. And to be honest, from a financial and logistical point of view, it's probably the best option for Pirelli. We could see races cancelled and new additions to the calendar at very short notice. So this step just makes their life a hell of a lot easier. And finally, we also have some new additions to F1 in 2020. Now, if you're a fan of the AWS tyre graphic from last year, I mean, who wasn't? You'll be thrilled to hear that we are getting even more new on-screen graphics for this season. I can hardly contain my excitement for this, but these new graphics are focused on car performance scores, with 4 main metrics being focused on, which are low-speed cornering, high-speed cornering, straight-line speed, and car handling. And on top of that, at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, an ultimate driver speed comparison will be used to allow fans the chance to see how the current drivers stack up against drivers from Formula One history, with data being available all the way back to 1983. To be fair, that one does sound quite cool. But anyway, it is also expected that there will be more graphics introduced later in the season. Look, I'm being a little bit sarcastic about this, but the truth is we haven't seen them in action yet, and they could be absolutely brilliant. There we have it then. They are just some of the things you need to know ahead of the season opening Austrian Grand Prix, which takes place next week. But again, if you have anything you want to know, you can pop your questions down in the comment section. We'll answer a few of those during the stream on Sunday. In the meantime, though, don't forget that you can, of course, follow me over on social media, and all of the links you need for that are in the description down below. But as ever, thank you for watching, and hopefully I will catch you again in the next one. Bye-bye.